Torchlight painted the ancient stone amphitheater in a hellish, flickering glow, the scent of pine smoke and predatory anticipation thick in the cool night air. Alpha King Kale of the Blackwood Pack took his place on the obsidian dais, a mountain of contained power amidst the gathering of rival alphas. His gaze, cold and assessing, swept over the spectacle below. The mating auction, a brutal tradition as old as the packs themselves. Unmated she-wolves stood on a rough-hewn platform, their postures ranging from defiant pride to trembling submission, each awaiting claim. Kale's attention was meant for Lyra, the stunning beta from the Riverstone pack, her beauty and political connections a perfect jewel for his crown. She stood at the front, a vision of calculated grace. Yet his wolf, a restless presence beneath his skin, tugged his focus away, past the desirable faces, to the very back corner. There, half-shrouded in shadow, cowered a solitary figure. Ilara, an Omega. Her head was bowed. Lank hair obscuring her face, but the torchlight caught the vicious, silvery scars that marred the visible skin of her neck and jaw. She was the ugly Duckling, the pity lot offered by a minor pack to fulfill the ritual's quota. Her scent, a fragile thread of rain and sorrow, was nearly drowned by the musk of fear and the crowd's derisive whispers. A memory, sharp and bitter, surfaced. Alpha Goran of the Stone Claw Pack, seated nearby, had once laughed at Kale's ascension, calling him a king of brute force with no subtlety. The insult had festered. Now, seeing Goran's covetous eyes fixed on the beautiful Lyra, a perfect, cruel idea crystallized. True dominance was not in claiming the obvious prize, but in demonstrating that his power was so absolute he could elevate the lowest and make it his own. It would be a humiliation wrapped in a lesson. The auctioneer, a grizzled elder, called for claims. Alpha's pointed, voices ringing out. Lyra's name was shouted, bids climbing. Goran leaned forward, a smug smile playing on his lips. As the clamor peaked, Kale rose. A hush fell. Every eye followed him. He did not look at Lyra. Instead, he raised a single, imperious hand and pointed directly to the shadowed corner, his voice a low rumble that silenced the arena. That one. For a heartbeat, there was pure, stunned silence. Then the amphitheater erupted. Shock gave way to incredulous laughter, a roaring wave of mockery. The auctioneer blinked, confused, before nodding to two guards. They strode to the back, their movements rough as they seized Ilara's thin arms. She did not fight, offered no sound as she was dragged forward into the full, cruel light. Her gray eyes, wide and empty, met Kale's for a fleeting second before fixing on the ground. Her scent of rain was swallowed entirely by the smoke and the collective jeer of the packs. Kale held Goran's furious, bewildered gaze, a cold smile touching his lips. He had made his statement. Let them laugh. He had just claimed. Symbol of his unrivaled reign, a living testament to his contempt for their games. The laughter was his victory chant. The raucous echoes of the amphitheater faded into a suffocating quiet as Kale led his claimed mate into a small, moon-drenched clearing deep within the Blackwood territory. Torches had been driven into the earth, their flames casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to recoil from the Omega's silent form. Ilara stood where he had directed her, a statue of resignation in the clearing's center. The crude auction robe had been replaced with a simple shift, but it did nothing to hide the tension in her slender shoulders or the way her hands trembled at her sides. Her scent, That faint thread of rain was now laced with the sharp, metallic tang of pure fear. Kale circled her slowly, his boots crushing the soft moss. This was the final act, the completion of the bond that would bind her to him for life. He had expected to feel nothing but cold satisfaction, the sealing of a strategic humiliation. Yet as he paused before her, forcing her chin up with a firm finger, her gray eyes met his. They held no tears, no pleading, only a deep, weary acceptance that was somehow more unsettling than defiance. In that look he saw the ghost of the laughter from the arena, reflected back at him without sound. His wolf, usually a bastion of certainty, stirred uneasily. He dismissed the feeling as irritation. This was a transaction, a claiming of property to cement his dominance. He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. She flinched at the contact, a full-body shudder that he felt through his palms. Beneath the overpowering fear, something else teased his senses, a subtle, deep pull like the roots of an ancient tree reaching for a hidden aquifer. It was buried, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It intrigued him, a puzzle where he had expected only blank space. "Be still," he commanded, his voice rough in the quiet. She obeyed, going utterly rigid. The curve of her neck where it met her shoulder was pale and vulnerable amidst the silvered scars. The mating mark would be placed there, a permanent brand of ownership. Kale's own canines lengthened, a primal response to the ritual. He bent his head, his breath stirring the fine hairs at her nape. Her scent of rain and fear filled his lungs. For a fleeting second, the strange, deep pull beneath it intensified, a silent call from a locked vault. Then he struck. His canines pierced her skin, swift and precise. He expected the faint, feeble spark of a weak bond, the dull acknowledgement of a low-ranking omega. He expected nothing. What erupted was an apocalypse. An ancient, seismic power, raw and untamed, detonated from the point of contact. It was not a spark but a supernova, a torrent of raw energy that blasted through his veins like liquid lightning. Visions, not memories but echoes of a time before time, flooded his mind. Primordial forests under twin moons, rivers of starlight, and the shadow of a wolf so vast its howl shaped mountains. The physical world dissolved into a maelstrom of sensation. A deafening, psychic howl tore through the clearing, a sound of such profound age and power that the very trees shuddered, shedding leaves like green rain. The torch flames snuffed out as one, plunging them into moonlight fractured by the energy swirling around Alara's form. Kale was thrown backward as if struck by a giant's fist, his body slamming into the thick trunk of an oak with a force that cracked wood. Pain screamed along his spine, but it was drowned by the cataclysm in his soul. His own wolf, always a controlled and regal presence, howled in answer from within him, a sound of recognition, of awe, and of primal terror. The new bond, now forged, was not a tether but a blinding chain of white-hot light, searing his insides with its intensity. Through its terrifying brilliance, he had one final, shattered glimpse before the world went black, Alara collapsing like a marionette with cut strings, her slender body shimmering with a latent silver power that made her scars glow like captured constellations against her skin. Kale lay sprawled against the oak's roots, his senses reeling. The world returned in fragments, the scent of ozone and crushed greenery, the cool damp of the moss beneath his palms, the deafening silence that followed the bond's violent birth. It was a silence that felt charged, heavy, as if the very air had been scarred. He pushed himself up, every muscle protesting, his head ringing with the echo of that primordial howl. The clearing was a ruin. A circle of flattened grass and ferns radiated from where Alara had stood, and the torches lay extinguished and broken. His gaze, sharp with a predator's instinct, found her. She lay motionless a dozen paces away, a pale heap in the moonlight. Drawn by a compulsion deeper than thought, he crawled to her side. Her scars, those silvered lines he had dismissed as mere evidence of a hard life, now pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. It was a soft, phosphorescent glow like moonlight trapped beneath her skin, tracing the cruel history mapped across her neck and jaw. Through the new bond, a connection that felt less like a thread and more like a flooded river carving a canyon through his soul, he sensed her. Not the weakness he had anticipated, but a vast, slumbering ocean of power, its depths unimaginable. And riding the surface of that ocean, a chilling, all-consuming terror. Her terror. Pack legends, stories told by firelight to wide-eyed pups, whispered from the recesses of his memory. Tales of the first blood, the original lineage blessed directly by the moon goddess, wolves of such pure power they were said to shape the land with their will. A line thought hunted to extinction centuries ago, their blood diluted into myth. The legend spoke of silver-touched skin and eyes that held the moon's own fire. His mockery, his act of petty dominance, had not claimed a broken Omega. He had claimed a living relic, a dormant volcano. The thunder of approaching footsteps shattered the eerie quiet. His beta, Ryan, burst into the clearing, his face pale beneath his dark beard, eyes wide with alarm. Two elite guards followed, their hands on their weapons, scanning the devastated glade. "My king!" Ryan's voice was a strained whisper, his usual composure shattered. He stared at Alara's glowing form, then back at Kale. The entire pack felt that. It was like the ground itself screamed. "What have you awakened?" Kale had no answer. He looked down at the unconscious female, her fragile form belying the cataclysm she contained. The political calculus of the evening, the humiliation of Goran, the statement of his uncontested power, crumbled to ash. This was no longer a game of status. He had inadvertently triggered something ancient and dangerous. Every rival alpha in the territory, every elder sensitive to the old magics, would have felt that surge of power. They would be stirring, questioning, seeking its source. His mockery had unveiled a secret that could be a weapon or a death sentence. Gently, moving with a care that felt foreign to his nature, he slid his arms beneath Alara. She was light, too light, but the bond thrummed between them, a constant, blinding reminder of what she was. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his chest, and a single strand of silver light traced from a scar on her temple. Ryan and the guards fell back a step, a gesture of instinctive awe and fear. "Secure the territory," Kale ordered, his voice rough but regaining its edge of command. "Double the patrols. No one speaks of what happened here, to anyone." His beta nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the Omega in the Alpha King's arms. Kale looked down at Alara's peaceful, glowing face, the laughter of the amphitheater now a hollow, distant echo. He had sought to claim a symbol of his dominance. Instead, he now carried the epicenter of a coming storm, and the first tremors were already shaking the foundations of his world. Alara awoke to a world remade. The first sensation was not sight but sound, a deafening symphony of whispers. The settling stones of the Alpha King's chambers groaned like ancient beasts. The distant heartbeat of a guard patrolling the corridor thumped a relentless rhythm against her eardrums. The rustle of silk sheets was a roaring cascade. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the assault of scent was worse. Pine, stone, leather, the faint metallic tang of weapon oil, and beneath it all the overwhelming, storm-laden signature of Alpha Kale himself. It was everywhere inside her, a live wire of connection that hummed with a tension she could feel in her bones. She was in a vast bed, swathed in furs, in a room of dark wood and stark grandeur. Moonlight streamed through a high, narrow window, painting a silver stripe across the floor. And he was there, a silhouette in a carved chair by the hearth, where a low fire crackled. He was watching her, his presence a physical pressure in the room, amplified 100-fold by the bond. Through that terrifying new connection, a conduit of raw feeling, she felt his conflict, a churning sea of shattered pride, cold fury, and a dawning, unwilling obsession that clawed at his insides. He felt her wake. The bond conveyed it instantly. She sensed his immediate recoil, his instinct to wall off the torrent of her own confusion and pain. But the bond, fresh and fierce, forced a breach. A flash of memory, not her own, seared across her mind. The amphitheater's laughter, his cold, calculated pointing finger. Then his own perception of her flooded back, her scars glowing with silver light in the clearing. His focus zeroed in on them now, a silent, demanding inquiry through the bond. Without words, the truth spilled from her deepest self, drawn out by his alpha will channeled through their link. A memory, long buried under a blanket of numb survival, surfaced. The cold bite of a silver knife, not in battle but in a dark room held by a figure whose face was blurred by trauma. The searing, silencing pain. The deliberate, cruel carving meant not to kill but to cage. To lock a door and throw away the key. The trauma had been a shackle, a psychic silver chain that had suppressed the lunar pull in her blood, muffling the call of her true nature until she believed herself only what she appeared to be, a broken, scent-faded omega. Kale absorbed this through the bond, his stony expression not changing, but she felt the ripple of grim understanding within him. His obsession deepened, laced now with a reluctant, furious pity. Meanwhile, Ilara's own senses spiraled. The lunar pull he now felt as a constant drumbeat was a terrifying new tide in her veins, a magnetic ache toward the moon she could feel even through stone. Her body felt alien, a vessel charged with a storm she didn't know how to hold. He stood abruptly, the movement sharp, cutting the thick silence. "You will remain here," he stated, his voice cold, a deliberate contrast to the fevered connection between them. "You will be protected. Guards are posted. Your needs will be met." Each sentence was a decree, meant to rebuild the distance his own actions had obliterated. He treated her not as a mate, but as a dangerous, unstable asset, his cold distance a shield against the bond's terrifying draw. Yet as he turned to leave, his gaze lingered on the scars visible at the collar of the borrowed nightdress, and through the bond, just for a second, she felt not coldness, but a scorching, possessive rage at the unknown hands that had marred her. Meanwhile, beyond the chamber door, his world was in an uproar. The council, a gathering of stern elders and hardened warriors, argued in hushed, vehement tones in the war room below. Some, their voices laced with fear, called her an abomination, a breach of the natural order that demanded isolation or worse. Others, eyes alight with awe, saw only the moon goddess's favor, a sign of ancient power returning to elevate the Blackwood pack above all others. Spy reports, delivered by panting messengers, confirmed the worst. Rival packs had felt the seismic surge of her awakening. Patrols reported shadowy figures scenting the borders. The most urgent report concerned the rival Silver Fang pack and its vicious alpha Vorlin. Their scouts, experts in tracking old magics, were already converging, drawn like vultures to the lingering scent of primordial power. The whispers in the dark were no longer just between a king and his unexpected queen. They were spreading across the territory, a chorus of fear, ambition, and gathering threat. The nightmares were not dreams but memories unchained. For 7 nights, Ilara drowned in them. The cold stone, the gleam of the silver knife, the pain that was not merely physical but a silencing curse. Each time she jolted awake in the Alpha King's vast bed, the bond would flare and she would feel Kale's own. Restless sleep sharpened into alert, frustrated awareness of her terror. He never came to her. The distance he maintained was a wall, but the bond made it glass. She saw his turmoil, his consuming obsession with the power he had unwittingly claimed, and his icy resentment of the vulnerability it forced upon him. On the 7th night, the waxing moon hung heavy and luminous, a great silver eye staring through her window. The lunar pull, which had been a constant, disorienting hum, became a deafening roar in her blood. The nightmare that night was worse. It held the knife's bite, but also the phantom scent of pine smoke and the sound of a crowd laughing. The two traumas, old and new, twisted together. Her fear spiked, a pure animal panic that had no outlet but the wild magic now awake within her. It happened in the training courtyard at dawn. She had been allowed to walk there under heavy guard, a brief escape from the stifling chambers. The warriors were already at their drills, the air ringing with the clash of practiced blades and the grunts of exertion. The moon, though pale in the morning sky, felt oppressively close. A warrior nearby shifted to his wolf form with a loud crack of bones, a display of casual strength. The sound was a trigger. The memory of the silver knife merged with the visceral reality of the shift. Her control, fragile and new, snapped. Agony tore through her. It was not the clean, practiced transformation of a trained wolf, but a violent, wrenching explosion. Bones elongated and reformed with audible, sickening cracks. Muscle and sinew stretched and knotted. A howl was ripped from her throat, but it began as a human scream and ended as something else entirely. A sound of raw, ancient power that shattered the morning calm. Where a slender, scarred woman had stood, now loomed a wolf. But it was no ordinary wolf. It was larger than the biggest alpha present, its form radiating a palpable, predatory majesty. Its fur was not a uniform gray or black, but a deep night shadow pelt shot through with living veins of silver that shimmered with their own light, like captured moonlight. Its eyes, wide and intelligent, blazed not with gold or blue, but with the cold, pale fire of the moon itself. She stood, panting, in the center of the courtyard, a creature of legend made flesh, her terror now translated into a physical presence of overwhelming, untamed energy. The training yard froze. Weapons clattered to the stone. Warriors stumbled back, faces etched with primal fear. This was not the scarred omega of their whispered jokes. This was a force of nature. Her sheer size and the ancient power rolling off her in waves triggered a deep, instinctive urge to submit or flee. Kale arrived like a thunderclap. He had felt the shift through the bond, a seismic rupture that had him sprinting from his council chamber. He burst into the courtyard, his own alpha aura flaring out, a tidal wave of dominance meant to control, to subdue. It crashed against the wild, lunar energy emanating from Alara. The two powers did not merge, they clashed, a silent, violent storm of wills that made the air crackle. Warriors cowered, caught between the two terrifying forces. He approached her slowly, his own wolf rising to the surface, his eyes glowing gold. She turned her massive head toward him, those moonfire eyes wide with animal panic and confusion. Through the bond, past the crashing auras, he finally saw her. Not the mistake, not the political complication, not even the dangerous weapon. He saw the queen in chains. The majestic power before him was shackled by a profound, childlike lack of control, her terror the lock on her own immense strength. The sight unraveled something rigid within him. His resentment and cold strategy bled away, replaced by a stark, undeniable truth. This was his mate and she was drowning. His aura shifted. The aggressive dominance softened, not into weakness but into a focused, steady pressure, a guide rope thrown into a storm. He took another step, holding her moonfire gaze. Haltingly, he reached out a hand, not in command, but in offering. His voice, when it came, was low, stripped of its usual ice. "Easy, look at me, only me." Her massive form trembled. The silver in her fur pulsed. Then, inch by inch, the wild energy began to recede, drawn back not by his force, but by the tentative connection his new tone forged through their bond. As the fear ebbed, her awareness returned. She saw the terrified warriors, the shattered training dummies, and him standing before her, his hand outstretched. A low whine escaped her throat. The moment hung, fragile as glass. Then a scout, bleeding from a gash on his temple, staggered into the far end of the courtyard, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "My king," the border breached. Silver Fang warriors, led by Vorlin himself. They're cutting through the western woods. They're asking for her, for the first blood Omega. His eyes found Alara's monstrous, beautiful form and filled with dread. They already know. The stronghold erupted into controlled chaos. Kale's order roared across the courtyard was a catalyst. Warriors abandoned their shock, their training overriding primal awe. The silver-veined wolf that was Alara shuddered, the moonfire in her eyes dimming to confused terror as the scout's words echoed. Kale did not hesitate. He stepped into her space, his hand pressing against the dense, shimmering fur of her neck. Through the bond, he pushed a single, clear imperative. "Shift back. Now." It was not a request but a focused command laced with an unfamiliar thread of protection. The ancient power within her resisted, a wild thing cornered, but the new trust, fragile as dawn frost, held. Her form dissolved in a cascade of silver light and cracking bone, leaving Alara kneeling on the cold stones, human, shivering, and clad only in the tattered remains of her dress. Kale swept his own cloak around her, his touch brief and impersonal, but the bond screamed with the intensity of the contact. "To the inner sanctum," he snapped at Ryan, who materialized at his side. "Guard her with your life." His beta nodded, his face grim, and gently but firmly pulled Alara to her feet, leading her away as she cast one last, wide-eyed glance over her shoulder. Kale turned his back, armor being fastened onto him by swift hands. The time for conflicted lessons was over. The storm he had unwittingly summoned was at his gates. Vorlin's attack was not a siege but a surgical strike. His elite warriors, shadows clad in gray pelts, flowed through the torchlit lower halls of the stronghold like poison. They did not seek to conquer territory. Their goal was a single, priceless capture. The clash was fierce and brutal, the air filling with the snarls of shifted wolves, the grunts of combat, and the sharp tang of blood. Blackwood defenders fought with desperate valor, but Vorlin's tactics were insidious. His warriors wielded weapons, laced with refined silver, their blades and arrows glowing with a venomous, pale magic. Each wound they inflicted was not just physical. The silver venom seeped into the bloodstream, weakening muscle and clouding mind, turning the proud Blackwood fighters into stumbling, agonized prey. Cale fought at the vortex of the battle, a whirlwind of golden-eyed fury. He shattered a Silver Fang warrior's arm with a brutal snap, hurled another into a stone wall. But for every enemy he felled, two more seemed to slip past, driving deeper toward the heart of the stronghold. He could feel Ilara's panic through the bond, a frantic drumbeat alongside his own rage. He cut a path through the fray, following that psychic pull, until he burst into the vaulted armory that served as the inner sanctum's antechamber. The scene there was a tableau of despair. Ryan was on one knee, clutching a gash on his thigh that smoked with silver residue. The remaining guards formed a battered half-circle around Ilara, who stood pressed against the cold wall, the cloak pulled tight around her. Before them, flanked by four of his most lethal warriors, stood Alpha Vorlin. He was taller than Cale, lean where Cale was broad, with eyes the color of tarnished coin and a smile like a razor cut. In his hand he held not a sword but a slender silver lance, its tip dripping with the same weakening venom. "Cale," Vorlin purred, his voice slicing through the moans of the wounded. "Still playing the noble king. I've come for what you so carelessly dug up." His tarnished gaze slid to Ilara, lingering on her scarred face with avaricious hunger. "The first blood, a living key to the old powers. You thought to keep her as a pet, a testament to your peculiar tastes." Cale positioned himself between Vorlin and Ilara, his body a shield. "She is mine," he growled, the words vibrating with a primal truth that went beyond claim. Vorlin laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "By what right?" "The right of a fool who mistakes a goddess for a beggar." He gestured with the lance, its tip drawing a lazy, threatening arc in the air. "Look at you. The mighty Alpha King brought low, kneeling to a scarred runt you claimed for a joke. Is this the destiny you envisioned, to die as the punchline?" The words were arrows, each finding a mark in the armor of Cale's pride. They echoed the amphitheater's laughter, his own cold calculation, the weeks of treating her as a dangerous mistake. He saw it all reflected in Vorlin's mocking eyes. In that suspended moment, the choice crystallized, stark and absolute. He could uphold the proud, lonely kingship he knew, a fortress of solitary strength that had just been proven vulnerable. Or he could embrace the mate, the destiny, the terrifying, magnificent power he had once mocked and feared. He made his choice. As Vorlin, sensing victory, lunged forward with the silver lance aimed not at Cale, but past him, directly at Ilara's heart, Cale moved. He did not raise a weapon to parry. He did not attack. He turned fully toward Ilara, meeting her terrified gray eyes, and threw himself into the lance's path. The act was one of absolute submission, not to Vorlin but to the bond, to the truth she embodied. The silver tip meant for her pierced his shoulder instead. Agony, cold and corrosive, exploded through him. The venom raced along his veins, a frost that sought to still his heart. He crashed to his knees before her, the world graying at the edges. But as his physical strength failed, the bond did not. It blazed brighter, a conduit now wide open, his surrender the final key. Through it he poured not just his protection, but his acceptance, his recognition, his need. He gave her everything, and she answered. A howl erupted from Alara, but it was not sound alone. It was pure, concentrated lunar force, a visible shockwave of silver light that exploded from her core. It shattered Vorlin's silver lance like glass, the venomous magic dissolving into harmless mist. The wave hit the Silver Fang warriors, throwing them back as if struck by a giant's hand, their weapons crumbling. Vorlin himself was hurled against the far wall with a sickening crunch of bone. Alara's form was no longer that of a frightened woman. She was radiant, terrible majesty incarnate. Silver light wreathed her, her scars blazing like constellations. Her eyes held the full, unforgiving glare of the moon, and an aura of primordial authority filled the room, pressing every wolf present to the ground in instinctive obeisance. Even Kale, kneeling before her, his blood dripping onto the stones, looked up and saw not the Omega from the auction, but the queen of the first dawn, awakened at last by the king who had chosen to kneel.